Before the Christianization of Rus, the world was different. People believed in Mokosh and Makosh, in Perun and Veles, in Prav, Yav, and Nav. Everything around them, the forest, the wind, the fire, was alive and filled with will. This story explores what the Slavs believed, how their worldview was structured, who ruled in the heavens and the underworld, and how these images survived in fairy tales, rituals, and even in saints. You'll learn who truly hides behind Baba Yaga, and why Ilya Muromets is not just a hero, but an image of an ancient god. Before the beginning of time, there was no light, no darkness, no air, no water. Everything existed in a motionless and endless void. The Slavs believed that before the emergence of everything, there was a great emptiness, a formless, soundless state, in which neither worlds, nor fates, nor time had yet been born. This was not nothing in the usual sense, but rather the seed of everything from which life would eventually arise. In the middle of this primordial abyss, the first vibration slowly formed. It had no shape and no name, but it was from this vibration that movement began, marking the start of the world's formation. Some legends said it was the first breath, the breath of the future. In others, it was a quiet sound, like a distant rumble or the crack of a spark in the void. Thus was born the first impulse of creation, which awakened sleeping forces. From this impulse grew the great world tree. It had no beginning and no end. Its roots went down into the darkest depths of the universe, and its crown disappeared into the heights beyond the visible. This tree connected three future worlds: the lower Nav, the middle Yav, and the upper Prav. At that time, they were not yet separated, but in embryonic form they were already present, like the shadow of the future in an unopened bud. Nav became the world of ancestors and mysteries. This was not a place of evil, as it was often portrayed later, but simply a realm where the souls of the departed rest, where ancient memory and deep knowledge are kept. Yav is our familiar, visible world, dense and material, inhabited by people, animals, and spirits. Prav is the realm of law and order, the place where forces that govern the cosmos dwell. There are no gods yet, but there are principles, like images of the future. Some tales say that at the dawn of time, a duck floated above the bottomless waters of the great primordial ocean. This was a spirit in the form of a bird, an ancient symbol of life and beginning. It dove into the depths and brought back 3 handfuls from the bottom: earth, sand, and stone. It spread out the earth, and plains appeared. The sand scattered, and shores were formed. It laid down the stone, and mountains grew. Where it sat down to rest, the first tree grew. When a feather fell from its wing, the first rain began. And where the first drop fell, grass began to grow. This legend was passed down from generation to generation, and everyone who heard it knew it. It contains not literal truth, but inner truth. A story about how form emerges from chaos, how life is born from silence. Wise elders said before the gods there was the duck, and this meant, in the beginning of creation, it was not personalities, but forces of nature that acted, their images, which needed no form or name. Another legend said that the first to appear were not beings, but opposites: light and darkness, cold and heat, stillness and movement. All of this formed a balance, a harmonious rhythm of existence. In this rhythm, slowly and unhurriedly, the canvas of the future world unfolded as if time itself was only learning to flow. Rhythm appeared, cycles emerged, light and shadow began to alternate, noise and silence, breath and rest. It was this alternation that became the foundation of the first laws of the universe. Thus order arose, not imposed from outside, but emerging from within the universe itself. This order was not strict. It pulsed like a living organism. It allowed things to change, to grow, to fall apart, and to come together again. And only when the structure of the three worlds, Nav, Yav, and Prav, became strong and movement gained a stable rhythm, did the possibility arise for more complex forces to emerge. These forces would later receive names and forms. The lineage of Lada, Svarog, Veles, and Perun would appear. Their struggles, their love, their sacrifices, their rules would begin. But all of this would happen later, for now, in the great silence between the worlds, only the gentle rustling of the leaves of the world tree could be heard, growing in the void, illuminated by nothing but the premonition of life. And this rustling was the first voice of the universe. When the world tree became strong and the three worlds acquired their boundaries, the time came for the first manifestation of divine power, not in the form of separate spirits, but as established principles embodying the design of the universe. The first of these principles the Slavs knew as Rod and Lada. Rod was not just a god, but the beginning of all beginnings, the progenitor of all living and existing things. He had no face, he was not depicted in human form, but was honored as a force giving life and order to everything. Rod did not create the world from nothing, but gave birth to it as if from within, like a living organism. His name represented the very idea of origin, the connection of generations by blood, the family as a continuous thread of life. In olden times, people said, everything came from Rod, and therefore his image was not personal, but rather all-encompassing. Rod was the breath, the essence, and the beginning of every being's destiny. Lada, on the other hand, was the embodiment of harmony, love, and accord. Her appearance was associated with the establishment of warmth in the world, with the arrival of order not only externally, but also internally. She embodied maternal care, fertility, the joy of life, peace in the home and on earth. Lada did not oppose Rod. On the contrary, she complemented him, softened, and balanced him. Without Lada, there would be no unity, no connection between forces and beings. In spring, during festivals and songs, her name was heard especially often, and she was associated with the renewal of nature, the blooming of trees, and the beginning of new life. From the union of these two principles, according to legend, Svarog was born, the celestial god, creator of law and patron of crafts. He was the first to bring fire. People saw in Svarog not just an element, but a force capable of transforming the world. Svarog, it was said, forged the sky and established the movement of the sun along the celestial circle. He taught people to smelt metal, build houses, and establish rules by which they could live in harmony. He was called the Celestial Smith, and legend said that every blow of his hammer created a new order. Stars, temporal boundaries, rituals, and laws. The fire from Svarog was not destructive, but creative. He was considered a symbol of the hearth, a force of justice and duty. Before beginning work, peasants and blacksmiths bowed to the fire in the stove as an image of Svarog's power and asked for his help in their labor. In some myths, Svarog was also considered the father of Perun and the god of rain, those who continued his work with a certain direction, one as the Lord of Thunder, the other as the god of sun and light. Then, from the depths of the earth at the border of Yav and Nav, Veles emerged, the god of wisdom, cattle, wealth, trade, and underground secrets. He was the opposite of Svarog in his position in the universe. If Svarog ruled in the sky, then Veles dwelt at the roots of the world tree among swamps, forests, and underground waters. His power was not menacing, but all-encompassing. He knew the language of animals, watched over fertility, kept the dead, and passed on knowledge to those who were ready to receive it. Shepherds, merchants, travelers, and healers turned to Veles for help, those who lived close to the earth and used its gifts. In folk belief, he could change form, becoming an animal, a snake, an old man with a staff. He was the keeper of agreements, the patron of trade and oaths. With him was associated the idea of fair exchange and the invisible balance in the world. And where power seeks mystery, a force always emerges that guards the manifest. Thus was born Perun, the god of thunder, lightning, and warrior law, the patron of leaders and defenders. He was considered a celestial warrior bringing order through force. Perun struck the earth with lightning when the covenant was broken, when rebellion arose, when the cosmic rhythm was disturbed. His lightning did not just burn, it cleansed, restoring justice. In Slavic mythology, Perun and Veles are not just two mighty gods, but two opposing yet interdependent forces. According to ancient legend, Veles once descended from Nav, climbed the trunk of the world tree, and stole the property of the gods, herds, wisdom, talismans, and images. This was not an act of evil, but a test of strength. So people believed. Perun, noticing the theft, became furious and began to pursue Veles. Their battle shook the sky. When thunder was heard, it meant Perun was hurling his lightning. When a downpour came in waves, it was believed that Perun was following him. And when silence returned, Veles retreated back to his underground kingdom. This struggle was endless. It repeated every year. Its echoes sounded in the change of seasons, in the fertility of the earth, in celestial storms. Spring was the time of Perun, clear, loud, and just. Autumn entered the power of Veles, foggy, soft, and secretive. People lived between these two beginnings, obeying their alternations and observing rituals so as not to disturb the fragile balance. Thus were established in the world the main deities: Rod as the primordial essence, Lada as his equal companion, Svarog as the establisher of order, Veles as the keeper of mystery and fertility, Perun as the defender of law and justice. They were not deified in the modern sense with altars and dogmas. They were felt, appealed to, offered bread, honey, and water. They were consulted in difficult times and thanked for rain and sun. The Slavic pantheon was not a collection of abstract ideas, but a living system of interconnected forces. These gods did not rule from above. They were within, in life, in the earth, in the sky, in people. And in their eternal interconnection lay the main law of the Slavic universe. Everything in the world is held in balance between light and shadow, between order and mystery, between strength and wisdom. From ancient times, the Slavs represented the world as something multi-layered. Everything that surrounded man, sky, earth, water, forest, wind, was not just part of nature, but links in a system with its own laws, its own forces, and its own boundaries. The world was divided into three interconnected levels: Prav, Yav, and Nav. This three-part structure was not abstract philosophy. It was felt in rituals, in language, in everyday life. Prav is the highest world, the place where gods dwell, patron spirits, and ancestors who have achieved the highest purity. It was not so much above as in another, brighter, and more ordered reality. The world of Prav was the place from which order, harmony, and meaning came. Here, according to legend, were the halls of Svarog, Perun, and other deities who maintained the flow of being. Each god had his own sphere of influence, but none of them ruled alone. They acted as guardians of various foundations: justice, fertility, light, wisdom, love. In the consciousness of people, Prav was not inaccessible. It was present in life through signs: clear sky, fortunate coincidence, inner confidence. It was believed that a person living according to conscience, in harmony with his family and nature, was closer to Prav, even if he himself did not realize it. Under Prav was Yav, the world of people and all living beings. This is reality that can be seen, touched, in which man is born, lives, and dies. Reality is a field of action, trials, decisions. Here the influences of higher and lower forces merge. Here fate unfolds. It is in Yav that man takes responsibility for his actions. And it is here that the thread is woven along which his soul will move. Yav is not a neutral plane. It is sensitive to how man relates to life, earth, body, speech, and other people. Home was considered the center of Yav, not just a dwelling but a sacred space, where flows from all three worlds converged. The stove was the entrance to Prav. The threshold was the boundary with Nav. Man himself was the axis connecting everything. Under Yav was Nav, the world of the dead, shadows, dreams, oblivion, and memory. This world was not considered evil or cursed. It was necessary and natural. In Nav dwelt the souls of the departed, and their fate depended on how they lived, how they were buried, how they were remembered by descendants. The souls of ancestors who were remembered, honored, and called upon at memorial services could become protectors of the clan, keepers of wisdom. But the souls of the forgotten, those who died violent deaths or were buried without ritual, could remain restless and even harmful. Velas's kingdom in Nav was not the power of an absolute ruler, but rather a guide between worlds. He guarded the boundaries of Nav, watched over the passage of souls, and preserved secret knowledge related to life and death. Ancient spirits and forces also dwelt there, about which little was known but whose presence was felt. Among them, Chernobog was not an evil god, but an embodiment of destruction, the end of decay, an integral part of the cyclical world order. Nav was not simply under reality, it intersected with it. Forests, swamps, burial mounds, remote ravines, river mouths. All of this was considered places where Nav was closest to the surface. Crossroads played a special role, symbolic thresholds between worlds. There offerings were left, fires were lit, and spells were spoken. To challenge Nav, let alone enter its realm without need, was never a good idea. People knew that anyone who crosses the boundary without respect can bring trouble upon himself. The boundaries between worlds were guarded not in the sense of walls and guards, but in the sense of invisible laws. There were entities that could not be seen but stood at the junctions and watched. One such was Meritz, the spirit of the threshold, guardian of the boundary between reality and Nav. He was not depicted, not spoken of loudly, but known. If the flame of a candle begins to flicker without wind, if the house suddenly becomes quiet, as if the air has become heavier, it means Meretz is near, and one must behave humbly, not make noise, not whisper bad things, not look in mirrors after midnight. There were also special customs associated with these boundaries. For example, before crossing the threshold of a house, a person bowed 3 times, and before sleep removed his belt, a symbol of protection from Nav. On Trinity Day, wreaths were woven and floated down the river to show that reality recognizes the boundaries and asks for Nav's goodwill. Even the dying were given a coin, not as payment for passage, as with the Greeks, but as a symbol that the soul would not forget the way home. Prav, Yav, and Nav are not 3 dimensions separated from each other, but a single fabric in which every movement in one world resonates in others. The world of gods, the world of people, and the world of the dead are connected to each other, just as day is connected to night, as the roots of a tree are connected to its foliage. The Slavs lived in this consciousness constantly. Their home stood in Yav, but above it rose Prav, and beneath it lay Nav. Everything was connected, and any disrespect to one of these spheres disturbed the balance. Therefore, every word, every gesture, every memorial or holiday had power. This was not superstition. It was a means of communication with those who are invisible, but real. The world was not divided into spiritual and material. It breathed with one breath, where everything had weight and everything was interdependent. The Slavs did not divide time into months and weeks as is customary today. They felt the flow of the year differently. For them, the year was not a line, but a circle in which everything returned, everything repeated, but never literally. It moved in a spiral, inscribing the memory of the past into each new ring. This circle was called the Wheel of the Year, and each of its revolutions was accompanied by holidays dedicated to the forces of nature, the change of seasons, the gods and spirits on whom life depended. This circle began with Kolyada, a winter holiday coinciding with the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice. It was on this night, according to Slavic beliefs, that the new sun was born, a symbol of renewed light, new life force, and a new year. In villages, people danced round dances with carols, dressed in animal masks, baked ritual cookies, treated guests, and went from house to house with good wishes. It was believed that Kolyada was the name of the solar infant, protected by gods and people so that he would grow and bring warmth. Wreaths of hay and ribbons were hung on windows to protect the home from evil forces wandering the earth at this time. Then came Maslenitsa, an ancient holiday of welcoming spring, originally not connected with the Christian fast, but coinciding with it in later traditions. Maslenitsa was a holiday of farewell to winter and the awakening of fertile forces. People held fairs, baked pancakes, a symbol of the sun, rode down hills, danced around dances, and at the end of the holiday burned a straw effigy of winter. This burning was not only a purification ritual, but also a symbolic act of ending the old year. Maslenitsa marked the turn of the wheel from death to life, from slowness to movement. When the earth finally awakened, the time came for spring rituals associated with Jiva, the living goddess, patroness of life, growth, water, and herbs. In her honor, Vesnyankas were held, ritual songs, people danced round dances, called upon spring, cleaned homes, yards, and springs. On Maslenitsa, Jiva went to the water, washed herself, children were washed, and bread was thrown into the river to appease mermaids and water spirits. This time coincided with the first thunder, a sign that Perun had awakened and his power had returned to the world to protect the harvest and truth. At the peak of summer came the most powerful, most magical holiday, Kupala, which fell on the day of the summer solstice. This was a night of fire and water, purification and love. Girls wove wreaths, young men lit fires. Everyone danced round dances together, jumped over flames, floated wreaths on the water, and searched for the fern flower. It was believed that on this night the earth reveals its secrets, herbs gain strength, and the boundaries between worlds become especially thin. Kupala was associated with the thunder god, a solar deity granting growth, and with Lada, the goddess of love and harmony. Some rituals even included symbolic weddings, vows of loyalty, and fortune-telling about one's betrothed. After Kupala, the wheel began to slow down. The sun no longer rose so high. Days began to wane. The time came for spas festivals, harvest holidays connected with gratitude to the earth for its generosity. Honey spas, apple spas, nut spas. These were all days of feasts, gathering, and storing. People said, "What you gather at spas will sustain you through winter." In autumn began one of the most important and quiet rituals, Velas nights, which coincided with the end of harvest and the change of light and darkness. These were days of commemorating ancestors. On these nights, lights were lit in windows. Special dishes were placed on the table for the souls of the departed. No noise was made, no profanity was used, and no musical instruments were played. It was believed that the souls of ancestors come to the home to see how the family is doing, to warm themselves, to rest, to give advice. In some families, a stool was placed near the threshold, a woolen shawl was laid on the bench, and a cup of water was placed on the window. These were not just symbols. This was a living conversation with ancestors. The wheel of the year was completed by the arrival of Mara, the goddess of winter, death, sleep, and rebirth. She was not feared but respected. Mara came when everything froze, when the earth fell asleep, when the air became ringing. No songs were sung to her, but spells were read. Grain was covered, wool was spun, and families gathered together. Her power did not destroy. It preserved, protected, and gave peace. Through her passed the end of one circle and the beginning of a new one. It was Mara who led the wheel to the next Kolyada, to the new birth of light. Thus, each holiday in the life of a Slav was more than just a pretext for a feast or game. These were points on the circle, turning moments at which the world itself spoke with man through fire and water, bread and honey, through ashes and silence. Each of these rituals was a trace of ancient knowledge in which there was no division between religion, everyday life, and nature. Everything was connected, everything breathed with one rhythm. And one who lived in harmony with the wheel of the year felt himself part of something greater: his family, the earth, time, and the world. The life of a Slav passed not only among people and under the patronage of gods, but also in constant proximity to those who belonged neither to the bright Yav nor to the dark Nav, but were woven into the very fabric of reality, spirits of places, phenomena, and elements who were known, felt, respected, and feared. They were not evil or good, they existed, and this required caution, memory, and ritual. Their presence was felt in the creak of floorboards, in soured milk, in the rustle of wind in the forest, and each generation passed on stories for the sake of mutual understanding with the world. The domovoi, the closest of all spirits, lived right in the house, most often behind the stove or under the threshold. He was the keeper of order, the protector of the family, a witness to all words and deeds under the roof. He was not called aloud without need, but was respected. Food was left for him at night. He was petted. A palm was touched to the corner of the stove, and help was asked for when moving. If the owners lived in peace, did not offend children, and did not forget traditions, the domovoi was kind, protected livestock, warned of troubles, and helped find lost things. But if quarrels, drunkenness, or dishonesty began in the house, the domovoi could leave, and with him went the feeling of coziness, stability, and the breath of home. One well-known story tells of a winter night when a stove caught fire in a house and an ember fell next to a child's cradle. The mother woke up as if from someone's push, managed to grab the child and pull him out. Later, she said she heard a quiet sigh nearby. The elders said, "The domovoi woke you, thank him." The leshy lived in the forest. He was its master, the chief spirit of the thicket. Paths, animals, shadows, and wild nature belonged to him. The leshy did not tolerate when his domain was invaded unceremoniously. Trees were broken without need, noise was made, litter was left. Then he led in circles, confused, knocked off the path. To get out, one had to turn a shirt inside out, put on a hat backward, or say, "Go home." He was leading me the wrong way. But the leshy could also be a helper. Before going into the forest, hunters bowed to the first tree they encountered and left a piece of bread on a stump. The elders said, "If the forest accepts you, the road will be easy, and you will find game." Once, in the Smolensk province, a hunter who forgot the offerings wandered in a spruce forest for a whole day. When he returned, the first thing he did was go to the forest with bread and a bow. From then on, he quickly found game and returned safely. The Vodyanoi lived in rivers, near mills, under coastal rocks. People feared him. He did not tolerate carelessness. He could especially drag underwater those who came without a bow, without making the sign of the cross, drunk, or in a joking mood. The Vodyanoi was strict but not evil by nature. He kept order. The first to learn to negotiate with him were millers and fishermen, throwing wool scraps, a piece of bread, or a coin into the water. If the millstones turned smoothly and the dam did not rumble, it meant the Vodyanoi was satisfied. Rusalki were spirits of deceased girls, especially those who drowned before marriage due to offense or without burial rites. In spring, especially during Rusalnaya week, their power increased. Then it was forbidden to sing by the water, to wash, and certainly to swim. In the south, it was said that Rusalki danced round dances in fields at night, leaving traces on the morning dew. And in the Novgorod region, one woman told how she heard the quiet cry of a girl by the river during a full moon. Her mother told her to leave a bunch of mint there and not to turn around. She did so, and from then on, her dreams became calm, and the milk of the cows stopped spoiling. The bannock was the spirit of the bathhouse. He was capricious and irritable, and one had to be especially careful with him. In the bathhouse, it was forbidden to swear, laugh loudly, spit in the corner, or leave the last drops of water unconsecrated. It was especially dangerous to enter the bathhouse after the last steam. The third steam was considered the time of the bannock. At this time he washed himself, and whoever disturbed him could be burned and frightened, see a bad dream, or fall ill. To avoid trouble, people left quietly, crossed themselves at the threshold, and sometimes left a rag, a scrap of fabric, or a handful of ash for the bannock. If someone was seriously ill, he was taken to the bathhouse and asked the bannock to steam out the ailment, but always with respect. The kikimora is a female spirit, most often associated with anxiety, sleep disturbances, and coziness. Her presence was felt in ticking sounds behind the stove, in heavy dreams, in children crying without reason. The kikimora tangled threads, hid things, whispered in sleep. According to legend, she appeared in houses where something was wrong, where there had been an unsolemn death, where peace was disturbed. To calm her, a knife was placed under the pillow. Mirrors were closed at night, and sharp objects were not left on the table. In one village near Vyatka, when an infant wouldn't sleep at night and neighbors heard footsteps in an empty room, they called a clairvoyant. She found an old rag behind the stove, rolled it up, whispered words, and burned it. After that, the house became quieter. These spirits were not enemies. They were reminders. Everything has an owner, and everywhere there are boundaries. They taught attentiveness, taught to be quiet when necessary, and grateful when fortunate. And those who respected them received the same respect and protection from the world in return. In the view of the ancient Slavs, the divine order could not be complete without the participation of the feminine principle. Male gods created structure, directed force, and protected, but true life unfolded in the embrace of those who connected, nourished, preserved, and completed. Balance lay at the foundation of the universe, and it was maintained by three great goddesses, Lada, Makosh, and Morena. Each of them governed a certain aspect of human destiny, from love and harmony to harvest and the thread of time, from the autumn of life to departure into Nav. Lada embodied spring, love, joy, and harmony. She was the patroness of marriage, harmony between people and nature, a symbol of renewal and warmth. It is no coincidence that she was remembered in songs when snow began to melt, when the first shoots rose, when birds sang. Her name lived in the very word harmony, and when they said that everything in the house was harmonious, it meant that Lada was near. Everything was in order. In the south of Rus and in the lands of the Palabian Slavs, she was honored in round dances where girls in wreaths sang spring songs, danced in circles, and threw wreaths into the water. If the wreath floated, happy love was promised. If it sank, changes were expected. Elder women taught, Lada is in the home and in the heart, peace. In everyday life, people did not pray to her as to a distant goddess, but felt her as a living force. In a kind word, in silence after a quarrel, in a child's smile. Makosh was the goddess of fate, earth, and fertility. She was known as the Great Mother, as the one who spins the threads of fate and keeps domestic order. In Rus, Makosh was one of the few goddesses whose cult remained strong even after the adoption of Christianity. She was associated with the spinning wheel, spindle, and loom. Women believed that every stitch and every knot was not just a craft, but part of the pattern of fate, woven by Makosh herself. Before major changes, weddings, births, or departures, housewives would place a ball of thread on the window, tie a new thread, and say, "I ask fate, don't let this ball disappear." In the corners of icons, along with images of saints, faceless dolls were often found, symbolizing Makosh and protecting the home. And in the field, her power was felt especially clearly. In the first furrow, in the first rain, in lush greenery, Makosh was associated with the power of quiet, deep, nourishing water. In drought, children went to the river and poured water on the earth with their palms, asking, "Mother Makosh, give water." This was not a game, but a sign of the living connection of earth and sky, woman and fate. Morena, or Mara, was the goddess of winter, seeing off, death, and the boundary between worlds. But she was not evil. Her arrival was perceived as an inevitable completion, as a necessary stop, as a time to take stock. Morena embodied not death, but rest. When trees shed their leaves, when water under ice slowed down, when the first frost settled on the grass, Morena walked the earth. She was respected and feared, not as an enemy, but as one who knows when it is time to close the circle. At Maslenitsa, a straw effigy was made, a symbol of Morena. It was dressed in old clothes, carried around the village with songs, and then burned or drowned in the river. This was not an act of expulsion, but a ritual farewell to winter, a sign of gratitude and goodbye. It was believed that if the effigy burned brightly, spring would come early. If the smoke went straight, the peace of the departed was not disturbed. In families where someone died, tribute was also paid to Morena. A cup of water was placed on the window, white fabric on the windowsill, fire was lit. This was not a dialogue with a force that takes away, but does not destroy. In some villages, it was believed that Morena holds the last thread of life and breaks it when everything is finished. Not anger, but precision guided her gesture. Lada, Makosh, and Morena were not opposites, but successive links in one chain. Spring, summer, and winter, birth, fruit, and end, love, fate, rest. They were not placed in churches and not depicted on icons, but they were felt in everyday life, in ritual, in weather, in words. Women knew them by memory, not by book. A girl playing with a doll wove the image of Lada into it. A mother sitting at the spinning wheel felt the breath of Makosh. A grandmother looking out the window at Nav nodded silently. Morena has come. As long as they were remembered, as long as they spun with thoughts of home, as long as they saw off with a kind word, the world lived in balance, and man knew he was not alone. For the ancient Slav, death was not the end. It was perceived as the most important transition, movement from one world to another. There was a path that began in Yav and continued in Nav, the world of ancestors, memory of silence. Those who left this life did not disappear, but moved to another space where they continued to exist as long as they were remembered and called. The connection between the living and the dead was not severed. It became invisible, but retained significance for each person, each family, and the entire clan. Death did not come suddenly, even if it came quickly. It was expected, felt, and prepared for. And so in every home, people knew that as soon as a person died, the space needed to be appeased. Everything unnecessary was removed from the room. Sharp objects, a bucket from under the stove, mirrors were covered, windows were closed, so that the soul would not leave prematurely before being forgiven. A candle was placed at the head of the bed. Next to it, a glass of water and a piece of bread. All of this was done without unnecessary words because death did not tolerate noise. In some areas, especially in the north, it was believed that the soul remained in the house for another 3 days. It said goodbye, looked around, got used to the new state. It was important that it not be afraid, not be confused. Therefore, relatives sat near the body, spoke in whispers, sometimes sang quiet memorial songs. The elders taught, don't call. The soul already hears. Don't hold on, it will leave on its own. When the time came for the funeral, a series of rituals began aimed at facilitating the transition. The deceased was washed by women of the family, usually elderly and experienced, dressed in clean, pre-prepared clothing. A cloth was placed under the head, a coin under the heels, a piece of bread or fabric in the hands. Sometimes a wooden spoon was left nearby so the soul could eat on the road. All of this was significant. Nothing was done without reason. The body was carried out through the threshold, always feet first. Birch bark or straw was placed on the threshold, which was then burned. The doors and windows of the house were left open so that the path was straight and unobstructed. After removal, the dwelling was cleaned, fumigated with juniper, and the water in which the deceased was washed was poured out beyond the yard. This water was considered a channel to Nav and should not remain in Yav. The path to the cemetery was passed in silence. One of the younger relatives walked ahead. At road crossroads, a branch or pebble was laid so that the soul would not return the same way. After the funeral, they returned home by a different road so as not to open a passage back. And at the entrance, they always washed, changed clothes, and sat down for a memorial meal. The memorial meal was not grief, but a meeting. The first piece of bread was placed on the edge of the table. The first glass was not drunk. It was left for the soul. In the house, they tried not to make noise, not to speak loudly, not to gossip. The food was simple: porridge, kissel, pancakes. Their tastes were not important. What mattered was to remember, to name, to feel. The following days had their significance. On the 9th day, the soul ascended to the border of Nav, and the family met it. On the 40th day, the soul finally passed, if it was released. Therefore, on these days, they remembered again, lit a candle, baked bread, invited guests, and said, "Are you with us? We remember." But the connection with the dead did not end there. There were special dates in the year. Radonitsa, the day of joyful meeting with the departed. Didi, an autumn memorial holiday. Parental Saturdays. On these days, tables were set, food was left on the windowsill or under a tree. Relatives were called by name, not as ghosts, but as those who were and remained. They were awaited in dreams. Signs were listened to. Stories about them were passed on to children. Central to this entire system was the spirit of the clan, not a specific ancestor, but a force connecting generations. It had no face but was felt at important moments, at birth, in case of illness, at a wedding, in trouble. A candle was lit in its honor. A prayer was read. They turned to it silently, gazing into the fire. The elders said, "If you don't know what to do, ask the clan." If a person left without ritual, suddenly, in anger, without words, without burial, the soul could be lost. Such people became restless. They did not harm intentionally, but sought a path. Then cold drafts, heavy dreams, unfounded anxiety could appear in the house. To help, they called a witch, brought gifts, lit a candle, placed a piece of bread on the threshold, and sometimes spoke the name aloud. You were, we remember, go in peace. But most often, when everything was done with respect, death passed quietly. The house did not become empty. It simply breathed differently. In it remained a sense of presence, not frightening, but familiar. If at night a floorboard suddenly creaked or the fire in the stove went out, no one was frightened. They only said, "He came to look." Among all Slavic tales and legends, one always sounded especially significant, as something more than just a myth. This was the story of the eternal confrontation between Perun and Veles, of the ancient balance without which neither weather nor order nor the world itself could be maintained. People repeated this story during thunderstorms, during rains, at the beginning of harvest, and on especially dark nights when it seemed that the air was stretched to the limit and ancient forces once again converged in a celestial battle. Perun, the god of thunder, lightning, justice, and warrior strength, was considered the celestial patron of order. His symbol was the oak, and his weapon was a stone axe or lightning bolt, which he took from the sky in the form of lightning. Perun guarded the boundaries of reality, punished violators of oaths, and cleansed the earth of everything that got out of control. He was called upon for help in times of strife, called upon during drought, and thanked after rain. His image was associated with the top of the world, unattainable but powerful. Veles was different. He did not live at heights. He dwelt in lowlands at the border of Yav and Nav, in fog, in forest thickets, in roots and stumps, in underground springs. He was the patron of cattle, trade, knowledge, poetry, and also the keeper of the souls of the dead. His form often took the shape of a snake, bull, or bear. He could change form, guide a traveler, help a sage, and teach an herbalist. He did not hurl lightning, but directed dreams. He did not bark. He tested. The myth of the conflict was known to almost all Slavs. In it, Veles committed a bold act. He stole celestial cattle from Perun. This could be clouds, symbolic herds, folk wealth, time, or even a wife depending on the region. Perun noticed the theft and rose to the sky. He swung his club, and a thunderstorm broke out over the earth. It thundered, sparkled, brought rain and storm. Thus began the celestial chase. Perun pursued the enemy who slipped away from him, hiding in a swamp, turning into a tree, or going into an underground river. Each time Perun found him, hurled lightning, and by this struggle, man read the weather. If lightning strikes, it meant Perun caught up with the enemy. If the storm came in waves, it meant the enemy was changing form and the chase continued. The meaning of this struggle was not for one to defeat the other. It symbolized the eternal rhythm of nature, rebellion and appeasement, heat and rain, silence and thunder. Without Veles, there would be no movement. Without Perun, there would be no measure. One violated order to test its strength, the other restored it to preserve the world. And every year, especially in spring, the cycle began again. The elders said, if thunder comes from the east, Perun is chasing Veles, and if from the south, it means he has already caught up with him. They also believed that when Perun strikes a serpent, a spring is born at that spot. Therefore, at the place where lightning struck, they placed a cross or stone as a sign of purification, in memory. In villages along the Kama River, a custom was preserved. During the first spring thunderstorm, men would go beyond the village, look at the sky, and one of them would throw an aspen stake into the grass and say, "Chase, Perun, not into us, but into the unclean one." And then they would return silently, without headwear, as a sign of respect. It was believed that if you heard the first thunder with a pure heart, The year would be bountiful. Even wedding ceremonies were often built on the parallel between these gods. The groom was like Perun, the bride like the daughter of Veles, who must be redeemed, taken away, and returned to the family. Thus, the ritual was woven with the symbol of the eternal union of heaven and earth, strength and mystery, truth and depth. But the quarrel always ended temporarily. Veles returned what was stolen. The storm subsided, and the sky became brighter. People went out into the fields, looked at raindrops on the leaves, and understood. Peace has returned. This myth was not told as a story with a beginning and an end. It was a living explanation of the world in which there is no good without shadow, no truth without temptation, no rain without lightning. And therefore, whenever the sky thunders, when the air is tense, when lightning strikes an oak, this is not just a natural phenomenon. Ancient forces are remembering each other. They are not friends and not enemies, but elder brothers, each of whom knows the price of power and the limits of his own. When Prince Vladimir decided to baptize Rus, it was not simply a change of religion. It was a sharp shift in worldview, an attempt to replace the pagan value system, where everything was connected with nature, the cycle of life, and the spirits of ancestors, with a unified Christian picture of the world with God, church, and canons. But just as a tree cannot rid itself of roots immediately, folk memory did not forget its old gods. Christianization went from top to bottom, from prince to boyars, from boyars to the army, from the army to cities. But in villages where peasants lived, herded cattle, gathered herbs, and sang wedding songs, ancient beliefs continued to live. Perun, who, according to legend, was cast down from his temple into the Dnieper, did not float into oblivion, but into the folk consciousness and returned in the form of thunder, lightning, and stormy skies. Veles, patron of cattle, knowledge, and the boundaries of worlds, disappeared from visibility, but remained in proverbs, in rituals for driving out cattle, in treats that were still left in the forest for good spirits. Officially, the Church sought to eradicate paganism, calling it idolatry and its gods' demons. But in reality, destroying centuries-old rituals proved impossible, and instead of direct struggle, the Church increasingly took the path of reinterpretation. Pagan holidays were preserved, but received new names, new meanings, and new patrons. Thus, Elijah's Day, approximately 27 inches or 69 centimeters, falling at the peak of the storm season, became the new image of Perun. Thunder and lightning were attributed to Saint Elijah, and people quickly became attached to the new image. On Elijah's Day, it was forbidden to work in the field so as not to anger the saint, and during thunderstorms, elders still whispered, "The thunder is angry." Veles, as the keeper of animals, was transformed into the image of Saint Blay, patron of shepherds and cattle. His day was celebrated in February, and it was then that spells against cattle disease were read, bread, honey, and water were brought to the barn. The house was fumigated with wormwood, almost the same as before Christianity. Women's rituals, primarily related to fertility and the annual cycle, also did not disappear but passed into everyday tradition. Cupola bonfires became evening gatherings, wreaths were floated on the river for decoration, and fortune-telling was explained as a game. Holidays remained, but the names of goddesses dissolved into concepts of Mother Earth or simply Mother Nature. However, paganism did not disappear. It went into the shadows. Its images ceased to be divine, but remained significant. The domovoi is not a god, but a spirit master. The leshy is not evil, but dangerous if you disturb his forest. Rusalki are not water goddesses, but souls of drowned women, but offerings were still left for them on the shore. Folk faith became dual faith. People crossed themselves, lit candles in church, married, and were buried, but at the same time placed a knife under the pillow for protection from the evil eye, left bread at the edge of the field for the field spirit, and did not enter the bathhouse after the third steam. Christianity did not erase the old gods. It covered them with a new layer, and beneath this layer, they continued to breathe. In fairy tales, Baba Yaga became the keeper of the boundary between worlds, reminiscent of ancient priestesses who knew the paths to Navr. Ilya Muromets, a Christian hero, absorbed the traits of an ancient thunder deity. Koshchai the Deathless embodied the archetype of the lord of the underworld and guardian of treasures. The old faith did not die. It transformed, adapted, and merged with the new one. The golden feather, the flying carpet, the ring, the magical horse, these are not simply magical items, but symbols of transition and power over the elements. Even secondary characters such as the Domovoy, Leshy, Vodyanoi, and Rusalka continue to live in folklore as unclean forces, yet they carry the traits of former nature spirits. The Domovoy is no longer a deity of the clan, but a guardian spirit. The Leshy is not the master of the forest, but its wild inhabitant, whom it's better not to anger. The Rusalka is not a water goddess, but the soul of a drowned woman, yet she still possesses the power of living water. These images preserved their function of protection, punishment, and assistance, but lost their sacred status. What's important is that fairy tales did not remember the names of gods, but preserved the principles. The world is still divided into underground, earthly, and celestial levels. The hero still must pass through a journey, prove his strength, withstand temptation, and choose the right path. He must pay for help and pay for mistakes. This means that even in the most naive children's stories, the structure of ancient myth continues to resonate. Intuitively recognizable. Over time, when folklore became a subject of scholarly study, 19th century researchers like Afanasiev, Sakharov, and Buslaev began collecting fairy tales, rituals, and legends. And what had previously been simply a bedtime story was revealed as an enormous layer of collective memory, where pagan roots, Christian reworking, and life wisdom were intertwined. It wasn't only children who learned through these tales. Through them, the people maintained world order. Fairy tales became the last refuge of the ancient world. There went the spirits who no longer had a place in the temple. There settled the archetypes that didn't fit into the canon. And everyone who tells a fairy tale, without even realizing it, continues to speak in the language of the old gods, perhaps without names, but still with their rhythm, their laws, their breath. Thus ended the history of the gods, and the life of the fairy tale began. But essentially, this is the same story told by two different voices.